So we're reminded by this aspiration prayer, really part of I think that the aim in reciting this, yes, to set a good intention for practice, and as a reminder that we are part of a whole ecosystem that sometimes we call samsara, right? We're caught in it as well, but everyone else is as well in one way or another. And those who aren't, let's say those who we might say are fully enlightened, are still, if they're in human form, they're still part of the framework, ideally, seeking to help uproot the causes and conditions of suffering. Yeah? So they may not be buffeted about by it to the degree that maybe the rest of us are. But this is the aspiration, and this is the theme for this evening, is how to take what we've been doing, to take this cultivation of this simple heart right here in the middle of my chest, the symbolic heart. The organ is slightly to the left. Well, your left would be this way. And actually make it available to all living beings as an immeasurable quality. So those of you who were here on the first week that we started doing Tonglen, you might recall how I think one of the things I mentioned was how abstract it is. The experience of immeasurable compassion to all living beings is a wonderful aspiration, and yet it can feel very abstract in some way, for some of us perhaps inaccessible because of that. So this is kind of where we have arrived. That first day, we went into the Lojong teachings, the mind training teachings, and sort of explored a bit this notion of bearing our own suffering first before we try and seek to go and basically breathe in all of the stuff out in the universe that we would call suffering, or born of the three poisons. So we're beginning with ourselves first, right? We are taking our own challenges onto the path to train for making the heart more and more, ever more spacious. And then last week, we focused on a person that we know, a dear one, a person that we are very close to, and just began practicing breathing in whatever challenge they're going through, their feelings, their experience. So we're now training with someone close to us, and yet naturally that will surface perhaps our own feelings, especially because we care about the person. And so the instruction there was just come back to your own, whatever it is that is arising in you that is difficult. But we'd already done that work the prior week to simply practice holding our own suffering. And this movement that says, okay, just suffering is suffering, but first I have to know how to bear my own, even if I'm practicing compassion for someone I deeply care about. And if the narrative arises, maybe it's a narrative of what it means to be a good friend or a good partner, good son, daughter, parent, whatever, then so be it. Then that narrative is that which may incite a feeling, and we have that to work with. And that's perhaps our own kind of reaction to working with these feelings. And then now, today, we're going to be exploring a bit, widening the circle and practicing first with a population, a group, perhaps. It could also be the earth, but something specific, or a cohort that is specific. So now we're widening the circle beyond just the person that we care about, that we love, but now taking it out, not yet into the universal immeasurable quality, but now practicing with others. And usually if we pick a group of some kind, we have a reason for it. So let's say, for example, we pick the environment, which is very much in a tenuous place, right? It's still something that is going to awaken feelings about it. Otherwise, we wouldn't probably choose to practice with it. And so there's always, I think, that aspect of reaction, reactivity, narrative, until we really recognize that spaciousness of the heart can simply be self-evident despite what arises. This is where it all becomes a unitary practice. And I'll talk in a bit about how this practice is both a shamatha practice. So shamatha is a term that means peaceful abiding, calm abiding. Yes, we want to be able to stabilize our attention and work with distractions as they arise and find a place of stillness that then yields a sense of peacefulness. And part of that is equanimity. Part of that practice of making the mind workable and sustaining our attention voluntarily with intent, then leading to what we call Vipashyana, or insights, things that we become aware of, and the wisdom that arises in the changes that we experience, the wholesome changes, that we can work with what is in the heart. One of the things that some of you have heard me talk about in the extension school classes is this new field called neurocardiology, where there are now seen, and actually we know that there are 40,000 different kinds of neurons in the heart, which is fairly new research. So we're not simply talking about the brain and neural pathways and neural networks in the brain, but also that which includes these processes within the heart as well as in the gut. So these are all very much interrelated. And these neural pathways, one of them, their characteristics is that of neuroplasticity, the notion that we can actually change these patterns. It doesn't mean that it's like, oh, I can just quickly flick a switch and do it. But this really sort of bears some clarity, brings some substantiation to the story that we read. Yeah. So how to work with the heart? How to work with this heart that we are hoping we can turn into an immeasurable vehicle of compassion. Now, people train to do this for long, long periods of time. And one of the things is that, consistent with what I just mentioned about the heart and about neuroplasticity, that consciousness, we consider that in these traditions, consciousness is that which arises from the heart. It's not something that is born within the brain, the gray matter of the brain and the central nervous system, but arises from the heart. These other parts are simply kind of channels for consciousness. If you take the brain apart, you can't find the source of consciousness. This is just, where is the source? But you can find a lot of vehicles, a lot of channels for it. This is still what we call sort of the hard problem, yeah, of consciousness. And I think it's a good thing that we don't know. Because it pushes us to further explore the subjective nature of consciousness and what is beyond it. And this is what Buddhist teachings, yogic teachings are all about. So whatever we put energy into, whatever kind of consciousness we curate, it will continue to evolve in that direction. Yeah. Whatever we put our consciousness into, those tendencies, those imprints, seek fruition, the ultimate fruition. This is why what we call these sort of habit patterns, or even more so addictions, whether they're physical ones or mental ones, are so difficult to change, because by then there has been a momentum behind those particular directions of consciousness that begin to sort of need to expand like a snowball. So this is kind of what we're up against in changing the heart, and yet it is so possible to do with contemplative practices. This is why, in my opinion, without meditation, without contemplative practices, it can be very hard to turn these adversities and reactions that we have into a spiritual path. And so thus we come to what I said earlier, that this practice that we call Tonglen, or sending and receiving, this is a Tibetan compound term. Tong, sending forth, receiving is Len, can be considered a shamatha practice. What does shamatha mean? How does that relate here to this practice of compassion? Well, part of what we're doing when we begin to meditate on suffering is focusing and stabilizing the mind intentionally, perhaps on the heart, perhaps on a feeling, but in such a way that it gradually ceases to waver or be thrown off by distractions. But by holding a conscious intention, the mind naturally settles, and then what arises in that place is a sense of calm and peacefulness. And we don't have to try to make this happen. This is just sort of a natural way that our underlying nature of this still heart, this peaceful, open awareness arises when we're able to bring the mind into a focus, relax, which is one part of shamatha, is just going through the body, relaxing, being fully present, mindfulness practice, essentially. The first three foundations of mindfulness: body, feelings, and thoughts, and mental objects. Or that's actually the fourth, but thinking mind, cognition, and mental processes. And then the fourth foundation of mindfulness becomes vipassana, or Vipashyana, which is where insights arise based on the first three. So all of this assumes shamatha, calm abiding, by sustaining attention, bringing it back when it wanders, allowing the mind to become still, not making it become still, allowing it to settle. And what arises in that space is peaceful abiding. So it's not terribly complicated. It's just, it's harder to actually do, perhaps, than understand. And sometimes it's not so hard. Yeah, one day is very different from the next. And then this next stage that we call Vipashyana, or some of you maybe know the term Vipassana, or insight meditation. Vipashyana is, okay, I'm starting to experience some changes because I'm stabilizing my mind. I'm relaxing into the present, into this body, and focusing on breath as an anchor. And now I'm noticing things are changing. I'm starting to relate differently. And here comes a thought. Yeah, here comes a stimulus of some kind. Here comes a projection, and sometimes it's a good thing. It's a pleasant thing. Ooh, chocolate cake in the kitchen. Oh boy, here I am. When I'm done, I'm just going to go and nip that sucker in the bud. I'm going to devour that piece of cake. So it doesn't always have to be horrible, awful thoughts or distractions. But even that, if we see that with equanimity, that chocolate cake is no different than this aversive experience that I'm recalling. It's just thought, it's energy. There we are relying on equanimity, on stillness, born of equanimity. All of these things we are bringing into our compassion meditation. This is why sort of shamatha is really the foundation for Tonglen. And even more so then, moving into insight, feeling a bit different, feeling the change, that I can hold equanimity despite what's arising, even to the point of breathing in what is causing me suffering. In other words, allowing it to arise into the space, into my inner space, my experience, so that I'm revealing its nature and I'm allowing it to exist. And then sending that suffering love, sending it this heart that is more spacious than the feeling itself. And that yields some insight. It yields some insight. In clinical terms, we might call this decentering, where we're no longer immersed in our experiences, but we're able to observe them, not necessarily from a helplessness of being within it, but rather to hold it in a more spacious awareness. And that is quite an insight. If anyone has had that in your practice, that yields the sense that I am more than this feeling, and this feeling does not define me, but it is an experience that I am having, and it is moving through me. If I bring to mind my dear person who is suffering, then I will feel something about them. I will feel bad for them, quote unquote. I will empathize. That's fine. But empathy isn't the end of this. Empathy and compassion are very distinct experiences. And so, what is it that, how do we see these as two very distinct sort of notions, and even more so experiences? Well, empathy is often, I like to define it as feeling the feelings of another through your own feeling sense. It's really based on sort of an intuitive or an experiential feeling of someone else. Whereas compassion is more of a capacity to understand and hold the suffering of another through wisdom, through the wisdom of your own heart. So feeling your empathy, feeling the feelings of another through the feelings of your own heart, and compassion being responding to suffering by experiencing and understanding that suffering through the capacity and the spaciousness of your own loving heart. And that implies wisdom. Yeah, and it also implies a sense of unity. It implies a sense of leaning in and coming together and being a companion within that suffering. And yet doing it in a way where we are really stable and able to hold this capacity to be present with equanimity. And in this case, equanimity does not mean being apathetic. It doesn't mean disengaging. Quite the contrary, we're highly engaged. We just have an evenness of mind that doesn't attach to outcomes or to needing the suffering to turn into joy. It's just being present with things just as they are in a stable way. And in this way, as we talked about last week, compassion and equanimity are both extremely important to this cultivation of what we call bodhicitta, or the mind of awakening, that arises through responding compassionately and spontaneously. It's a resolve, what we can call a spontaneous resolve to being present and alleviating suffering. That can also include ourselves. As we talked about the first day of doing these sessions on Tonglen, we do this with our own suffering first. So is that kind of making sense? My agenda here is to kind of link things together, because often I think that things can feel very separate. We learn these teachings on Shamatha and Vipashyana and Tonglen and it's like, wow, how does all of this work? Well, this is how one way we can think about it in a very practical way, and how mindfulness fits into this as well. So equanimity. This is one of the keys to turning compassion into an immeasurable quality. It's not just about the loving feeling, but it's about the stability. It's about the responding with an evenness of mind that really has no stake, personal stake or egoic stake in the story. We may have one, to be sure. And yet, while we're practicing, if we want this to become a spacious, immeasurable quality, it's not so much about that anymore. The story is just self-evident, the story of unifying. This is why the opposite of compassion is not hatred, but separation. Compassion itself is that which unifies. Disconnection, separation, the root cause of hatred and aversion. What we might be tempted to say, well, this is the opposite of compassion. Well, it's really separation and disconnection. So from a Buddhist standpoint, how compassion is seen as that which unifies. This is the work of the bodhisattva who sees unity between myself and your heart, my heart, your heart. not different. We may be different people, of course. We have different histories and, different ethnic, perhaps, backgrounds and such. Yeah, there's a beauty in that. And yet, fundamentally, the Bodhisattva sees the what we can call sort of the unity consciousness at the heart of compassion. And then the last thing I'll say is rather what is often called the enemy. If you've done any kind of loving kindness meditation or study, there's always going to be that person or those people that we go, well, this makes it hard for me to be compassionate. In fact, in my extension school course, right now I'm teaching a course on compassion, and some of you have taken that class. And one of the papers is, who do you find it hard to have compassion for and why? And what do you think might be a remedy for that, some kind of contemplative remedy? And precisely because that is one of the most challenging parts. The Bodhisattva vow says, may all sentient beings or living beings awaken. May I be, I vow to alleviate all living beings from their suffering. And here we underscore all. It's not, well, I vow to alleviate this group of people from suffering, but not that group of people over here. This person, not that person, because this person has done that, but this person, wow, they've done on and on, right? So if we're really holding to the true aspiration of both the bodhicitta prayer at the beginning, the bodhisattva vow, how on earth can we cultivate enough equanimity to wear the words, may all living beings, where we really mean it? We are sincere about it. And that may include the oppressors, to the ones who are being oppressed. That may not sit so well for some of us, especially given the circumstances in the Middle East. We may have very strong opinions where we're located on that. And yet, if we really are wanting to commit to these teachings, one of the ways that we've done this in the past, when we did a practice, I think the day after October 7th, we've done practices on Ukraine and the war there. We've done practices on things like earthquakes, and usually if there's some major event, the next session will be practicing Tonglen as a community for the people involved. And one of the ways we do that is by creating a wide enough circle that it includes everyone involved, regardless. Because even the oppressors are mesmerized by the sheer variety of perceptions about themselves, about their own fears, their own needs, that have caused them to be blind of what they're doing to others. And so the causes and conditions are shared, and yet the impacts can also be shared. I think one of the things we did talk about not long ago, actually, was this notion of evil, good and evil, this polarity, this dualistic notion that Buddhism would step in and say, well, there are very, very unwholesome tendencies, yes, but what we're really looking at is suffering, profound suffering. And so something that has been snowballed into a being that does horrible things, these are utterly, utterly miserable human beings, steeped in their own suffering and delusion. So if we're really committed to this, part of it, I think, has to do with this boundless quality that we call compassion or karuna. It begins with empathy. Loving kindness opens the flowering of the heart, and compassion then becomes the spaciousness, the response. There is aspirational compassion or aspirational bodhicitta, which is what we do when we cultivate Tonglen. We are cultivating this this wish, this becoming of a wish fulfilling gem through the heart for all. And then the action, that this practice leads to us showing up. It may lead to insight. How do I respond skillfully with love, maybe with fierce compassion that has good boundaries? Then that becomes the action bodhicitta. That becomes then what we are manifesting. We become the environment others experience, and that has an effect. It has a change. So these are a couple of categories. Those the aspirational piece, which is what we really seek to open and uncover through the practice, and then taking it off the cushion and into the world, as they say in yoga communities. That it makes a difference in our conduct, in our behavior, in our capacity to listen, to be present, to be a refuge for others.